Okay, we got a chicken joining us today, and Daffy, the duck, the lame duck, and Willow somewhere around here causing mayhem. So we're gonna do second part of chapter 3. None of the sheep had seen Othello arrive. He just appeared one morning. A fully grown ram with 4 dangerously curved horns. 4 horns. They had never seen a 4-horned sheep before. The sheep were impressed, and the rams were secretly envious. Sora remembered all that day very well. It wasn't so long ago. George introduced Othello and said he sang and whistled and danced. They'd never seen him so excited. He sang in strange languages and spread some of the stinging spray they feared on a narrow but impressive wound running right over Othello's forehead. The sheep smeared where Othello stood perfectly still. George jumped from one leg to the other until he had to take his woolly sweater off. Zora trotted back to the other sheep. She wanted to ask if Othello had really just defeated a large grey dog. It seemed to her unlikely. She met Maudie grazing near George's place, so close to it that Zora had to bite back a remark in passing. Maudie was chewing lost in thought. "Maudie," said Zora, "did you see how Othello fought that dog?" Maudie stared blankly at her. "Othello is a sheep," she said. "Excellent grass around here," she added. Zora turned. She asked Maple, or better still Mopple, if any sheep could remember such things. Then it would be Mopple the whale. When she raised her head to pick up Mopple's scent, she noticed that Othello had joined the other sheep and was grazing by. He looked just the same as usual. Zora bent her head and began grazing too. It was best for sheep to forget confusing things as quickly as possible before the world gave away beneath their hoofs. Sheep are not talkative folk. That's because their mouths are often full of grass, and sometimes they have nothing but grass in their heads. But all sheep love good stories. What they like to do best is listen, marveling the one thing, because it is easy to listen and chew at the same time. Something was missing in their lives now that George was not around to read stories out loud to them, so it sometimes happened that one sheep would tell the others a story. The storytelling sheep was very often Mopple the whale, now and then Othello. The mother sheep would mostly talk about their lambs, and that didn't interest the other sheep. Of course, some lambs were legendary. Ritchfield had been one of those in his name, but the mothers of those lambs deliberately kept their mouths shut. All the sheep were interested when Othello told his story, but they didn't really understand him. He told them about lions and tigers and giraffes, strange animals from countries where it was burning hot. That was often argued because each sheep imagined these animals differently. Did giraffes smell like rotten fruit? Did they have brushy ears? Did they have a little fleece? Othello didn't usually get into further any mere description, and even these were enough to give the sheep uneasy feeling about the backs of their necks. Othello never talked about humans. When Mopple told a story, it was nearly always about humans. Mopple retold the stories that George had read out loud to them. He had remembered everything, and his stories could be almost as good as when they were heard for the first time around. They were just shorter. At some point, Mopple would be hungry, and then that's when the story would end. The better a story it was, the sooner it was over. The real excitement now wasn't always in the stories themselves, but in wondering how far he would get to that point. The prospect today looked poor. Mopple was telling a fairy tale. In no other story were there so many meadows, so much grass, and so much fruit. Mopple's eyes told them of the fairy ball held every night at the Frog's Meadow. His eyes were moist as he told them how envious goblins and fairies were of the apples in the festivals. He told them about the appearance in the long grass of the Goblin King, who would raise the dead from the ground and send them to haunt the living. Then something unusual happened. Mopple was interrupted. "Do you think Goblin King really did it?" Asked Cordelia. hesitation. All the sheep knew she was talking about George's death. Mopple quickly pulled up a trough of grass. Or Satan, added Lane. Nonsense. Satan would never do such a thing. Several sheep belted in agreement. None of them thought Satan capable of such an act. Satan was an elderly donkey who sometimes grazed in the meadow next to theirs, and altered blood-curdling cries. His voice was truly dreadful, but otherwise he had always struck them as harmless. I still think it was God who killed him," said Mopple. With his mouth full, Beth thought so too. The sheep had a certain respect for Beth because she had invested so much time and trouble in such a doubtful item as George's soul. "Why would he do such a thing like that?" asked Maudie. "God moves in mysterious ways," explained Cloud. The others looked at her in surprise. Cloud realized that she had said something odd. "He says so himself," she added. "Then he's a liar." Othello looked furious. The eyes of the sheep were shining with admiration. Only Miss Maple was unimpressed. Oh boy. Willow, I'm reading this story for you. What are you doing? Daffy's joining me now. She just had a bath today. She is our lame duck, which means that her one leg doesn't move. So we take extra care of her. She might make some strange noises here and there. Willow has gone. Don't know where she is. "Was it high or low tide on the night George died?" she asked suddenly. For a second they were all silent. Then Mopple and Zora bleated in unison. "High." "Why?" asked Maudie. Mabel began walking up and down as she focused. "If George had been thrown off the cliff, the tide would have washed him away, maybe all the way to Europe. Then no one would have known what happened to him. This way, though, it was downright impossible for him not to be found. The murderer wanted George to be found. Why? Why do they want something to be found?" "The sheep thought long and hard because they wanted to please someone," suggested Mopple. "Because they want to warn someone," said Othello. "Because you want to remind someone of something," said Sor Ritchfield. "Exactly." Miss Maple sounded satisfied. "Now we must find out who's pleased, who's been warned, and who's been reminded of something, and what they've been reminded of." "We can't find that out?" asked Heather. "Maybe we can," said Miss Maple. Without another word she began to graze. For a moment all the sheep were silent, thinking with some awe of a huge task ahead of them. A lamb suddenly belted out loud with fright, and ingested its mother. Sarah sat up on a belt of her own. She was twisting and turning as if trying to shake an insect off of her fleece. Her lamb stood beside her, looking tearful. Then something small and shaggy spot past Sarah's legs and ran off, zigzagging as it went. The halfling, the milk thief, the winter lamb. It had taken this opportunity to steal Sarah's milk, but they were all busy talking. Every sheep knows of a winter lamb. What a winter lamb body's no good to the flock. Winter lambs are born at the wagon season in the cold with twisted characters and noisy souls. Bringers of bad luck who can tempt robbers to roam around freezing flocks of sheep at the lean time of the year. And there had never been a worse winter lamb than the one who had plunged their flock since last year. He had been born at the darkest hour of the night. His mother had died. They expected him to die too, but he twaddled after the flock, squeezing, and the lamb and the sheep reluctantly made way for him. This went on for 2 days. On the third day they had expected him to die at last, but George fooled them, fed him with a bottle of milk. Then they belted, bleated, reproaching at him. He muttered something about brave little thing, and against all indications of reason, he had rescued the lamb. The ruthless milk thief, as boldly one of prospect, as a goat, far too small for a lamb of his age, but fat and cunning. They tried to ignore him as far as they could, so there wasn't much anything the sheep were doing now. Once they were sure that the winter lamb really had run off to the edge of the meadow and was hanging around under the cow's trees, they acted as if nothing had happened. They spent the rest of the day grazing, but not as George's place, and discussed the grass in the evening twilight. Then they trotted off to the hay barn. Cloud had announced that it was going to be a rainy night. They pressed close together, lambs in the middle, older sheep around, full-grown rams on the outside, and went to sleep at once. Where do you think Willow went? Okay, couple more pages. Miss Maple dreamed a dark dream, a dream in which she could hardly see the grass in front of her own sheepy nose. Suddenly one of them moved towards Maple. His vulgar outline took on the shape of a butcher. Maple turned and fled. The spade that seemed to have been holding in on front hoof fell to the ground and with a dull thump. She heard the butcher's voice behind her. "Our flock needs a shepherd," he whispered. Maple knew at this point that she didn't need a shepherd. It was a flock she needed. She belted under the other sheep, answered from the darkness. Stumbling towards, she found the flock and pushed her way into the safe woolly tangle. Something made her suspicious. Her flock smelled wrong. Just why, Maple couldn't say. She heard the butcher coming closer and froze. Then a wind rose and blew away the darkness like mist. In the pale light, Miss Maple could see that all the sheep in the flock had turned back. She was the only white sheep among them. The butcher was making straight for her, holding an apple pie. Suddenly it was dark around her again. Miss Maple had woken it up. Here comes Willow. She was about to snuggle up to Claude, her favorite nighttime neighbor, but something was still wrong. The sheep round her smelled like her own flock, and yet they didn't. She could pick up the scent. Moppo, who still smelled slightly of lettuce. Zora, with her scent of fresh sea air. Othello also had a particular smell, but it was as if the other sheep had been mingling with them. Half sheep, as it were. Miss Maple peered around, but it was at least as dark as the hay barn, as in her dreams. The rain was pouring down outside, and there were no other sounds. Maple suddenly felt sure that she had seen a movement close to the barn door. She pushed Cloud aside. Cloud began belting quietly in her sleep, and other sheep joined in, making Miss Maple temporarily lose her sense of direction. She stood still. After a few moments, the belting died away, and she heard the rain again. "Are you biting my book? Don't bite my book. Don't bite my book." Oh, it's okay. You want to stand up? It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay. We're almost done reading. Oh, yeah. It's okay. Come on, baby. Outside rain like stair rods were falling into the night. Maple stood up on her knees in mud. Her fleece soaked up the water, and she felt twice as heavy as usual. She thought of the lamb who had seen a ghost and was going to make her way to the dolmen when she heard a sharp ringing sound like stone knocking on stone. It came from the cliffs. Maple sighed. The cliffs were certainly not the place she wanted to meet a wolf's ghost on a pitch dark rainy night. At the same time, she moved on. It was not as dark as on the top of the cliff as she had feared. Come on, sweetheart. Oh. Come on, baby. Okay. We're almost done reading. Calm down. It was not as dark on the top of the cliffs as she had feared. The sea reflected a little light, and you could see the coastline. Shady but unmistakable. You could also see that there wasn't anyone there. Whoever had made the noise must have fallen off the cliffs. Maple felt her way cautionally up to the edge of the slippery slope with her wet hooves and peered down. Of course, she couldn't see anything. Not even how far down the abyss went. She decided to retreat. Realized that it wasn't going to be easy. The grass was wet and slippery. Someone had set a trap for her, and she, Miss Maple, the cleverest sheep in Glenkill, and perhaps the world, had walked right into it. Maple waited for a hand or a nose to give a gentle but determined push and send her over the edge. She waited a long time, but she realized there was no one behind her. She lost her temper. With a furious backwards jump, she made it to reasonable firm ground again and trotted back to the hay barn. She stopped at the door and took a deep breath of air. She smelled of her flock and nothing else. Maple puffered and panted with relief and noticed that her legs were trembling. She searched for Cloud, who was still beating softly somewhere. Lost in a dream where there was no butcher and no apple pie, probably just a large green field of clover. Suddenly, one of her still shaking hooves trod in something warm and liquid. The liquid was dripping off Miss Sir Ritchfield's. The old ram was standing there motionless with his eyes closed as if he were fast asleep. He was soaking wet like a sheep who had been dipped under water for a very long time. Miss Maple laid her head on Cloud's woolly back and thought. Okay, now we're on chapter 4. Okay, we're bringing you back to your friends, okay? Okay, say bye. Say bye. Okay, bye.